Hey, this is Stuart. As the entertainment industry constantly tries to find the next popular trend, I've always found that audiences really gravitate towards crossovers. Whether that's with movies, TV shows, comics, or video games. You mix two or more franchises together to push out one product. There may be some who overlap in these groups. Yes, I know both of these franchises. One copy of Mario and Sonic at the Olympic Games, please. But it's always special when it's someone's first introduction. You go to your local comic shop and you see Spider-Man on the cover. But who is this powdered toast man?
What the?
The more popular forms of crossovers have to be the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Super Smash Bros., and Fortnite.
Fortnite Battle Pass. I just shit out my ass.
But back in the 90s, something special was released. Multiple something specials, in fact. The gaming company Capcom would team up with studios such as Marvel and SNK, and cross them over with their own fighters to create what many know them as Capcom Versus. June 18th, 2024, Nintendo would release a direct presentation, showcasing upcoming games for that holiday season. The one game that caught myself as well as many others off guard was the Marvel vs. Capcom Fighting Collection.
And more.
As per usual, I knew a few things about the series as a whole, but I wanted to learn more. Looking through these games, I questioned how different the Capcom side of the roster would be. Sure, there would be familiar faces, but sometimes the roster would be a little too skewed for Street Fighter, and I never understood why until I did research for this video. How I want to approach this, I wanted to go through all the Capcom Versus titles, look at what characters were chosen, and where they represent. I'm going to be talking about a lot of characters, nothing too in-depth with their design, but if there's some changes, I'll do my best to point them out. The titles I'll be talking about are all the Marvel vs. Capcom games, all of the SNK vs. Capcom games, Tatsunoko vs. Capcom, Street Fighter Cross Tekken, and some Japan-only titles I want to save for last. Some of these may not be considered Capcom Versus due to the different playstyles, but I still think they're worth mentioning. Especially the grand finale, I swear to you, this one's a killer.
This is arcade quality.
Let's start with X-Men Children of the Atom, released in Japan arcades on December 8th, 1994. The first guest character would be Akuma from the Street Fighter II Turbo, which released earlier that year in arcades on February 23rd, 1994. His sprite would be directly ripped from that game and put into X-Men. Marvel superheroes would feature Anita in the Darkstalkers series as a hidden character in the Japanese versions. You could consider her as a test character, since she isn't finished and therefore extremely cheap. It's interesting that Capcom chose her as opposed to Donovan, who watches over her. However, she does use his sword in her moveset, as well as summoning Akuma and Mei Ling, who is also from Darkstalkers. You can also unlock her in the Marvel vs. Capcom collection, if you toggle hidden characters on. The real meat and potatoes starts with X-Men vs. Street Fighter. We're introduced to Ryu, Ken, Chun-Li, Zangief, M. Bison, Dalsum, Charlie, and Cammy. Everyone on this list is representing their appearance from the Street Fighter Alpha series, which takes place in between the first and second games. You can see that with Ryu with his white headband, Ken Masters with his longer hair, Zangief and M. Bison having more muscular proportions, Dalsum having a smaller abdomen and waist compared to his Street Fighter II design. The last three are interesting in my opinion. Charlie was chosen over Guile, the more popular character from Street Fighter II. However, their moveset is similar, and this is due to the fact that Charlie was Guile's superior officer and taught him his fighting style. For the longest time, I thought Chun-Li was an original sprite, but it's actually her sprite from Alpha 2. But with a cheat code, you can change her outfit into Street Fighter 2. Cammy's design, however, is an original sprite. This would be later used officially in Street Fighter Alpha 3. Her design is similar to the Bison dolls, who are brainwashed women loyal to M. Bison, except that Cammy's outfit is a much lighter blue. Marvel Superheroes vs. Street Fighter gets rid of Charlie and Cammy, and instead replaced them both with fan favorites Sakura and Dan. Sakura being a major fan favorite when Alpha 2 came out, and getting her own manga series called Sakura Ganbaro, or in English, Sakura Gives It Her Best. Dan is also a huge fan favorite. He's considered a joke character, being a parody of SNK's characters, Ryo Sakazaki and Robert Garcia from The Art of Fighting. Capcom saw them as being knockoffs of both Ryu and Ken, so playfully they combined the two characters to create Dan Hibiki by taking Robert's looks and Ryo's gi, but making it pink. Akuma also makes his return, but with his sprite from Alpha 2. Now for some secret characters. We got Cyber Akuma, Dark Sakura. The wiki says she got burnt by the sun, so is this sunburnt Sakura? And Shadow.
Minor spelling mistake. I win.
Shadow's actually Charlie, who was infused with psycho powers by M. Bison's group, Shadowloo. So he's technically not gone.
Spider-Man, you. Wolverine, Captain Commando. Hulk, Morrigan. Most exciting battle, Marvel versus Capcom.
Marvel vs. Capcom cleaned the board, only keeping Ryu, Chun-Li, and Zangief for this roster. Ryu has his updated Street Fighter II look, if you notice the red headband and color difference in his gi. Newcomers to the roster are Morrigan, a succubus from the Darkstalkers franchise. It was also a very popular fighting game at the time, so it made sense to add her. Captain Commando, who's from a side-scrolling beat-em-up with the same name. You'll notice in that game he has blue sunglasses. They've been changed to red instead. The idea of him putting on sunglasses and becoming a superhero, along with the shape of them, would be inspired by Ultra 7. Strider Hiryu is from a 2D hack-and-slash game with the same name. This game would upgrade his design by giving him his iconic red scarf. Despite not having many games, he's a major fan favorite in the Marvel vs. Capcom series. Think of it like Captain Falcon for Nintendo. Not many games, but is beloved by fans. Jin Sayotam from the fighting game Cyberbots Full Metal Madness. Much like Captain Falcon in Smash Bros., Jin was never seen outside of his mecha, so the developers decided to heavily inspire his moveset on Kamen Rider. And finally, my boy Megaman. Specifically, his designs from Mega Man 8. At this time, there were several Mega Man franchises being released. This one's commonly known as Classic Mega Man.
Shut up!
Capcom would also include secret characters, that being Roll, who's Mega Man's younger sister. Her design is also from Mega Man 8. Lilith, although in this, she's a palette swap for Morgan. Lore-wise, she was a part of Morgan that was separated from her and gained her own conscience. This version has Lilith and Morgan switch bodies. Her ending is quite humorous, with them both butting heads into Zangief on accident. And then it turns out Zangief took over Morgan's body, but Morgan's also in Zangief's body. Oh boy. Finally, for the playable side, we have Shadow Lady, which is a version of Chun-Li if she was infused with machine technology by Shadowloo. Now, we're not done yet. While this may be all the playable fighters in the game, Capcom also has its own roster for assist characters. First up is Arthur from Ghosts and Goblins, whose game on the original Nintendo is considered one of the hardest. You get hit twice, you're cooked. Unknown Soldier from the arcade game Forgotten Worlds. Lou from 2 of the 3 arcade games in 3 Wonders. A side-scroller called Midnight Wanderers, and a shoot-'em-up called Chariot. Here's Saki Omakane. Her appearance makes you think she's from an arcade shooter, right? She's actually from a quiz/dating sim called Quiz Nanaro Dreams. Tanpu, an antagonist from the Strider series. Devilot from Cyberbots Full Metal Madness. Anita makes a return, but as an assist. Pure and Fur from adventure game Capcom World 2. And finally Michelle Hart from Legendary Wings. Well, I would love to see some of these characters playable in the next game. Sadly, they don't make a return, but we'll see a few of them in the future. Let's shift our focus for a bit, starting with SNK vs. Capcom, Match of the Millennium. Released on November 30th, 1999. Based on the sprite portraits, we can depict that Ken and Ryu are representing Street Fighter II. The other Street Fighter characters making a return are Chun-Li, Zangief, Sakura, Akuma, Dan, and M. Bison. The newcomers being Guile, who debuted in Street Fighter II, as well as the protagonist to the live-action Street Fighter II movie.
For I beheld Satan, and he fell from heaven like lightning!
And Evil Ryu, a version of Ryu being taken over by the Satsui no Hada, translated to Surge of Killing Intent. It's a dark energy primarily used by Akuma in the series. We would first see Ryu unknowingly tap into this energy by delivering a Shoryuken to the character Sagat so hard that it opened up his chest. We also get to see some variety with Darkstalkers. Morrigan returns, but is joined by Felicia, a Catwoman raised by a nun, and Baby Hood, who may look innocent at first, but she's actually a psychopath who kills Darkstalkers for money. If you see in her moveset, she uses lots of guns and a knife.
Let me see what you have! No!
I want that band from this arcade!
Moving on to Marvel vs. Capcom 2. We have 28 characters to go through, so we'll round them up by series. Every Street Fighter character makes their return.
Yes!
Ryu strangely goes back to his alpha look. It makes me wonder what was the point of updating him. Maybe it's because of Ken? I don't know. While Guile was playable in Match of the Millennium, this is his first appearance for MVC. His sprite would be taken from Alpha 3 Upper. For Darkstalkers, the previous 3 would return, but they're joined by Anakaris, the 12th Pharaoh of Egypt. I've mentioned earlier that Megaman had multiple series releasing. Classic Megaman and Roll return, but they're joined by Tronbon and Servbot from the Megaman Legends series. Tron rides Gustave the Robot, who's from the prequel game, The Misadventures of Tronbon. While in that game they're red, but the developers chose to make them green for this one.
That thing's green! Green!
But don't worry, there is a red alt. With series that only feature one character, we have the returning Captain Commando, Jin, and Strider. But joining them is Jill Valentine. Jill is one of the 2 playable characters from the first Resident Evil game. We also have Hayato from Star Gladiator, a science fiction 3D fighter. I remember when I first got this game, him alongside Megaman and Jin were my team. Probably wasn't a good team, but they caught my eye. I was really young and I just thought they all looked cool. These last 3 are completely original characters for this game. Ruby Heart is meant to be this game's protagonist, her ship being one of the many original stages, as well as the location for the ending credits. Sansan III is the granddaughter to the original Sansan from the 1984 arcade game. She sets out on a journey after her village was struck by a mysterious disease. For the final original character, we have a Mingo. Due to his wacky design, I always thought he was related to Darkstalkers. He sets out on an adventure when a cursed wind starts killing off plant life. He also has his own stage. I like how one of the cacti in the background has a sombrero. It's cute.
I just can't believe it. You're amazing. You win.
You kissed your dad on the mouth?
Later that year, SNK vs. Capcom, Millennium Fight 2000 would be released. Calling it a versus Capcom is too generous, as it feels like it should be SNK vs. Street Fighter, featuring Morrigan. It's even weirder considering Felicia and Baby Hood were in the previous game.
Where are they?
I know this game has its audience, it's still really beloved, and I mean no hate when I say this. Ryu, Ken, and M. Bison would receive updated sprites based off of Street Fighter 2. Chun-Li would get an updated sprite based off of Third Strike. That leaves Guile, Zangief, Dhalsim, Morrigan, Cammy, and Sakura returning without any changes to their sprites. The final returning characters would be Akuma and Evil Ryu. The newcomers would be Blanca and E Honda. It's pretty cool, this rounds out the original roster for SF2. The remaining newcomers would be the boss characters, Balrog, an aggressive boxer, Vega, a claw-wielding narcissist in a mask, and Sagat, the final boss from the original Street Fighter. After his defeat and near death from the hands of Ryu, Sagat originally joined M. Bison's rank to seek revenge, before later redeeming himself in future games. A later version called SNK vs. Capcom Pro would receive Dan, but with an updated sprite.
This film takes place less than a year after the September 11 terrorist attacks.
The following year, SNK vs. Capcom 2 would release. The game would feature 2 different art styles, one from Capcom and the other from SNK. It's really cool seeing these characters in a different art style. Ones like Morrigan translate really well, while others...
Damn, Daniel.
Everyone returns from the original game, but Evil Ryu was for consoles only. The newcomers being Eagle from the first Street Fighter, Rolento and Maki from the Final Fight series. Now, Final Fight was considered to become the original Street Fighter 2 before it became its own franchise. It also shares the same universe, so other characters like Guile and Cody have made playable appearances in the Alpha series. There's also Chun-Li from Street Fighter 3. His twin brother Yang would appear in 2 of his supers. As for the fan-favorite newcomer, we have Kyosuke from Rival Schools. He's on a team with the main series protagonist, Batsu, alongside Hinata. It's interesting they made him playable over the main character. What's more surprising is that he's front and center on the box art. Apparently he's trash in tier lists, but I don't know, that's kind of cool. Batsu and Hinata do make appearances for his supers, which is a very nice touch. Finally, we have Shin Akuma, who's a more powerful version of regular Akuma, almost becoming one with the Satsui no Hado. On July 24th, 2003, SNK would release their end of the collab. It was titled SVC Chaos. Every character would be drawn in SNK's art style. While they all look more darker, the amount of detail can't be ignored. The standards return: Ryu, Ken, Chun-Li, Akuma, Dan, Guile, Dhalsim, and M. Bison. The boss characters from Street Fighter 2 would make a return: Balrog, Vega, and Sagat. For newcomers, we would be introduced to Hugo from the Final Fight series. His design would be based off of his appearance from Street Fighter 3, Second Impact, and Third Strike. His looks also resemble the late wrestler, Andre the Giant. With SNK making new sprites, surely we're gonna have an updated Morrigan sprite. Right?
Look, nothing.
So she doesn't even appear in this game. Instead, we have Dimitri, the original protagonist of Darkstalkers. SNK had a lot of fun making him. Like, look at that aura. I also love his special that turns all the guys into ladies before sucking their blood away. Red Earth would receive Tessa, a sorceress. She would be playable in Capcom's other in-house crossover title, Super Gem Fighter. Interestingly, instead of Megaman, we would receive Zero. This version of Zero is from the Game Boy Advance sub-series called Mega Man Zero. It takes place roughly 200 years after the events of the Mega Man X timeline. The short summary is that Zero's mind would be placed into stasis away from his body so that the deadly Zero virus could be studied and hopefully eliminated. After a series of unfortunate events, Zero is awakened inside of a brand new body with memory loss. This one is noticeably shorter than his original body. Ghosts and Goblins would finally receive a playable character. Just not Arthur. Instead, we would receive the iconic Red Devil, named Red Armor. I would first see this character be revealed in Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3, which we'll talk about later. So when I first saw this sprite as a kid, I was really intrigued. So if I was interested in something like games, shows, etc., I just loved doing research on them. As for the final characters, Shin Akuma would make his return, but we would also be introduced to Violent Ken, a non-canonical version of Ken after being brainwashed by M. Bison's psycho powers. So think of him as Shadow and Shadow Lady from the previous Versus games. There wouldn't be another Capcom Versus game until December 11th, 2008. Tatsunoko vs. Capcom, Cross Generations of Heroes would be released only in Japan. With this game using 3D models, Capcom couldn't port all their alpha characters into this game.
I thought what we had was special!
So they got creative and had one character represent one game. Original Street Fighter had Ryu, whose hair had become noticeably darker, possibly due to age or just a creative decision. Street Fighter 2 would have Chun-Li, just wouldn't feel right without her. For Third Strike, we would have Alex, who was the protagonist of that game. Surprisingly, that's it for Street Fighter. There's been a significant time gap between SVC Chaos and now, so Capcom did have more franchises to work with. We'll start with the Mega Man series. Roll makes a return, but representing her classic era from the NES Mega Man days. Her moveset got an entire overhaul, based off of her being a housekeeping robot. For Mega Man Legends, we would receive the main character, Volnut. The Legend series, being Mega Man's first transition into 3D, is mainly remembered now for its cancellation of the third game. Being the literal end of the timeline, it feels unfinished, and that's a shame. Okay, we'll talk about that at another date. Morrigan makes a return, along with Saki and Batsu, from being an assist and cameo respectively, to fully playable characters. From the Onimusha series, we would receive Kaijin Nosoki, the protagonist of Dawn of Dreams. He's based off the historical figure Hideyasu Yuki. The series is known for its use of adapting historical figures that shaped Japan, but adding a supernatural twist. An odd pick from Capcom's GameCube and PS2 era, we'd get Beautiful Joe. His games are a series of side-scrolling beat-em-ups with a film reel added for really cool visuals. I just found this out. There's a title on the DS. Capcom, you gotta advertise your games better. TVC is a two-person tag team fighter. However, 2 exclusive characters would count as one giant fighter. From Lost Planet, we would receive the PTX-40A. I know kaiju battles are popular in Japan, so it is cool that the developers did add this. 2 years later, the game would receive a North American release, adding 2 exclusive characters from Capcom. Instead of Resident Evil to represent the zombie era, we would get Frank West from Dead Rising, a photojournalist who ends up trapped inside of a zombie-infested mall, as well as the returning Zero, but this time his appearance is from the Megaman X series. At the time, he was an S-Class Maverick Hunter, and secretly the greatest creation of Dr. Wily, the main villain of the classic series. It did take a while, but the world would be introduced to the 3rd entry of the Marvel vs. Capcom series. With the game using 3D models instead of sprites, the roster would get a major overhaul.
Alright, get lost, all of you. You're fired. Go on, scram. Get out of here, you moochers. That's right. Keep moving.
You know what? Yeah.
Except you stay.
Instead of 12 characters from Street Fighter, it would be cut down to 4. Again, this is due to Capcom having more franchises to work with. Let's start with the returning fighters. We would receive Street Fighter 4's appearance of Ryu, Chun-Li, and Akuma. Zero from Mega Man X would return, alongside Tron Bonne from Legends. The Darkstalkers ladies, Morrigan and Felicia, would return, Beautiful Joe returning from Tatsunoko vs. Capcom, Arthur finally being upgraded from assist to playable, and finally, Jill Valentine would return, but instead of her appearance from the first Resident Evil, it would be her brainwashed self in Resident Evil 5. This also includes a brand new moveset. Street Fighter 4 would mark the revival of the fighting game boom, so including one of its newcomers, Sea Viper, was a smart choice. Resident Evil was also becoming huge in the West, so to represent the latest game at the time, we would receive Chris Redfield and Albert Wesker. Both would first appear in the original game, Chris being a co-protagonist and Wesker being the leader of STAR's Alpha Team, before later revealing himself as a villain and a member of Umbrella Corporation.
So you've come.
Devil May Cry, originally pitched as Resident Evil 4, before becoming its own franchise, we would receive Dante and Trish. Dante is a devil hunter and the son of Sparta, his design being from the iconic 3rd entry, and Trish, a puppet of the antagonist Mundus. After being saved by Dante and her revival, she later joined him at his shop, Devil May Cry. Her design is based on the first game. Darkstalkers would give the pink slip to BB Hood and Anakaris, in favor of Hisenko, first appearing in Night Warriors, Darkstalkers Revenge. She's based off of a Chinese hopping vampire, Zhangxi, Nathan quote-unquote Rad Spencer, from the 2009 reboot of the Bionic Commando series. The only thing I ever heard from this game is that Spencer's wife is a part of the ARM. That doesn't make sense, but okay. The cast of Final Fight would cross over into numerous Street Fighter and vs. Capcom games. Mike Hagar, the mayor of New Retro City, would finally make his appearance. To round out the initial roster, Amaterasu from the Okami series. While this game does use cel shading, I love how the developers kept the oil-painted outlines from her game. It just makes her stand out from everyone else.
You want to get a lip liner that's a shade darker than your lip, so you make sort of like a kissy face.
Just 4 months after the game's release, Capcom would reveal Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3. It would be sold separately for $40 at the time. 6 new fighters from both Marvel and Capcom would be added. The first trailer would reveal the exciting return of Strider Hiryu and Red Armor, who now went by Firebrand. Maybe not exciting for Firebrand. When I first started following the game before its release, I remember there being a lot of pushback from the removal of characters such as Megaman and Venom. This would only fan the flames when out of nowhere, the character portraits for the remaining newcomers were leaked. I remember out of all these picks, Rocket Raccoon was the most despised. This was before the Guardians of the Galaxy movie came out, so the mainstream market didn't know who he was. I like to go in more depth with Marvel at a later time, but let's get back on track. The next returning character would be Frank West. He was actually meant to be playable in the initial roster, but due to time constraints, he had to be pushed back for later. Nemesis would become the 4th character for Resident Evil. He was the main threat in RE3. Wielder of the Yamato Blade, we got Virgil, Dante's older twin brother. He seeks nothing but ultimate power, and don't worry because he's got it. He's considered one of the most broken characters in the game, his design being from DMC3.
You got that right.
What's considered the most bizarre choice is Phoenix Wright from Ace Attorney. This dude isn't a fighter, he's a lawyer. Maybe he fights the law. I remember at the time, this had a lot of hype around it. Ace Attorney is a visual novel series beloved by many. His playstyle mainly consists of him gathering evidence to prosecute your opponent. He was originally planned as a playable character in Tatsunoko vs. Capcom, alongside Franziska von Karma. According to the MVC wiki, they were scrapped due to issues involving the objection speech bubbles. When translating it into other languages, it was considered unbalanced. I guess some of them would be too big, some would be too small. I gotta be honest. Despite the odd removal of some characters and franchises, I feel like this is the most well-balanced roster, including characters with new releases, called classics, taking advantage of popular series at the time, and at least giving us a few returning characters who were left behind. There's a few other things I want to mention before moving on. This game would also receive DLC costumes for every character. While some would be costume changes, others would be brand new fighters, but having the same moveset. The DLC costume characters would be Cyber Akuma, John Talbane from Darkstalkers, Yellow Iris from Battle Circuit, a Megaman X outfit from Dead Rising, Mei Ling in her human form from Darkstalkers, Resident Evil 3 Jill. I'm including this because she's not brainwashed under Wesker. We can go into a boxing match later if you disagree, it's all good. Spencer's design from Bionic Commando Recharged, Gloria, an alternate alias of Trish from DMC2, and unfortunately, the most controversial one has to be Mega Man X for Zero. To be fair, it did make some lore sense. X did wield the Z-Saber during Mega Man X6. He was a part of the Weapon Expert pack. I remember this being the only pack I bought as a kid. From an interesting concept turning into a financial disaster, we had Street Fighter Cross Tekken, which would be released in March 8th, 2012. The roster from Capcom would mainly consist of characters from Street Fighter 4. Alright, everybody get in places, we'll go from the top. We got Ryu, Ken, Guile, Chun-Li, Cammy, this time from her Street Fighter 2 outfit, Sagat, Dhalsim, Hugo, Rolento, Zangief, Balrog, Vega, M. Bison, and Akuma. The newcomers would be Abel, the main protagonist of Street Fighter 4's story, Poison from the Final Fight series. She's Hugo's manager. I like her character portrait, mainly because of the watercolors at the end of her hair. Ibuki, a fan favorite from the Street Fighter 3 series. Rufus, a not-so-fan favorite. And finally Juri, an absolute fan favorite, who, for some reason, would be partners with M. Bison. Aren't they like sworn enemies? I don't get it. I think it's just two bad guys teaming up. Whatever. This game doesn't make sense. So earlier I mentioned a financial disaster. Yeah, this game's most famous for a very scummy tactic. Do you guys remember on-disc DLC? So, downloadable content's simple. There's stuff not found in the game's files. You pay a fee for this through the internet or the game's online store, and now it's yours.
The power of the sun in the palm of my hand.
On-disc DLC, though, the content's already there in the files, but you have to pay with real money to unlock it. Not in-game currency, like real money. If this is kind of confusing, here's a silly analysis. Say you buy a loaf of bread, but in order to access the last few slices, you need to pay the store more money before you can eat them. These DLC characters from Capcom would be Guy and Cody from Final Fight. Their appearance would be from Street Fighter Alpha. The other characters being Sakura, Blanca, and Elena, a fan favorite from Street Fighter 3, but was absolutely hated in 4 for the competitive scene. Also from Street Fighter 3 would be Dudley, a British boxer gentleman who can't keep track of his car. PlayStation would get exclusive characters in their version, one of them being Megaman. This design is based off of the North American box art from the first game, but unfortunately, due to the co-creator, Keiji Inafune, leaving Capcom, a lot of Mega Man games were being cancelled at the time. It was supposed to be a tongue-in-cheek joke. Instead, this just felt like a major insult.
I don't understand!
But with all this, It did feel like Capcom was listening, because on December 3rd, 2016, we would receive the teaser for Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite. The very first character we see is the long-awaited Mega Man X. No longer in an ending cutscene, no longer a card, no longer 2 DLC costumes, finally playable. He was built by Dr. Light to be the first robot with the ability of free thinking. However, the world wasn't ready for this kind of advancement, and needed more testing. Unfortunately, Dr. Light wouldn't be around to see his creation complete. X was discovered and awoken 100 years later by Dr. Kane. His design would become the base for what would be known as Reploids. Now, can you tell I like the Mega Man series? The roster for Infinite is a lot smaller and more condensed. Surprisingly, Street Fighter only has 2 reps, Ryu and Chun-Li. Resident Evil would be cut in half, only keeping Chris and Nemesis. Ghost and Goblin surprisingly keeps both Arthur and Firebrand. Thankfully, Morrigan, Strider, Zero, Frank West, and Mike Hagar make their return. And somehow Spencer makes it back, despite his game not being received well, but, whatever. Tragically, only Dante would return from Devil May Cry, but this was 2 years before Devil May Cry 5 would be released. Aside from X, the only other newcomer was Jeddah from Darkstalkers 3, whose ultimate goal in that game is to recreate life by fusing all souls into one. Which is this disturbing thing. He would lure Morrigan to him by fusing a part of her soul to create Lilith. Infinite would receive 6 DLC characters, and for some reason, only 2 of them would be Capcom instead of 3.
1, 2, 3.
First up is Sigma, the primary antagonist of the Mega Man X series. He used to be the commander of the Maverick Hunters, before being corrupted and turning Maverick himself. It's believed that Sigma's battle with Zero, when he first awoken from his pod, gave him the virus transferring from Zero into Sigma. While his body gets destroyed, his programming always remains. His design in Infinite is based off of the first Mega Man X, wielding a green saber. The second and final DLC for Capcom is Monster Hunter, originally planned to be in the base roster for MVC3, but the team behind Monster Hunter thought it wasn't a good fit at the time. In the game, the playable hunter you choose can vary, but the developers chose to depict them as female. Her default costume is the famous Rathalos armor. You might recognize Rathalos as both an assist trophy and a boss character in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. Infinite would also receive DLC costumes as different characters. For Dante, we have Dante from the failed reboot of DMC. Black hair and a different personality. This iteration of Dante was playable in PlayStation All-Stars. Frank West will receive a Proto Man outfit. Proto Man's the older brother of classic Mega Man. Monster Hunter would wear the Kirin armor. Ryu would receive Evil Ryu, Sigma in his body from Mega Man X5. I believe the community dubs him as Captain Falcon. And Strider would receive his rival, Strider Hien. And that was the roster for Infinite. The roster did what it could, but I'm sure there were outsiding factors that prevented not only the roster, but the entire game from reaching its full potential. Just look at some of these models. As of right now, that's pretty much it for the Versus series, but I thought it would be pretty fun to mention a few other series that Capcom crossed over with, starting with the Japan-only Namco x Capcom. Instead of a traditional fighter, this would take the approach of a strategy RPG. This list is a bit different. It has allies, enemies, bosses, and enemies that turn into bosses. I just want to stick with the allies if that's okay. So our returning characters are our mainstays. Ryu, Ken, Chun-Li, Cammy, and Sakura from Street Fighter, Mike Hagar and Guy from Final Fight, Arthur from Ghosts and Goblins, Captain Commando from the same name, Morrigan, Lilith, Dimitri, Felicia, and Isenko from Darkstalkers, Mega Man Volna, Tronbon, and Servbot from the Mega Man Legends series, and Strider Hiryu. Now these newcomers are pretty interesting. It seems that Capcom would always choose the most relevant characters in the Resident Evil series. So instead of Chris or Jill, we would receive Bruce McGurvin and Fongling from Dead Aim. Rival schools, instead of having the main students, we would receive the teachers, Hideo Shimazu and Kyoko Minazuki. Captain Commando will receive his other allies, Hoover, who's a baby in a mech, Mac, a mummy alien, and Ginzu the ninja. We have some exciting news. Unknown Soldier is no longer just an assist from the first MVC, and what's better, we have Unknown Soldier 2. Why are you not clapping? Street Fighter Alpha would receive Rose and Karin. Rose is a fortune teller who wields soul power. Karin originally appeared in Sakura's spin-off manga and acts as a rival. Sylphie, coming from Forgotten Worlds, acts as the shopkeeper in the game. Mega Man Legends would receive Roll Casket, an enthusiastic tomboy mechanic and best friends with Mega Man Volnut. And finally, we have Regina from Dino Crisis. So originally, I wasn't planning on including Project Cross Zone 1 and 2, because it's with multiple companies instead of just 2. But to quickly go over the roster, this is shocking, you'll never believe this. We have... Now that we have that out of the way, let's never talk about that again. I'm not sure how much I can show off in this next entry, since it's appeared in multiple art exhibits. Instead of a video game, Capcom would team up with Osamu Tezuka for an art crossover. Characters from each series would be drawn by the opposite staff. For example, Mega Man and Astrobot. You'll be able to purchase this art book online. Prices may vary, especially if you go on eBay. For this, I just want to talk about the front cover. The familiar faces you'll see are Chun-Li, the classic Mega Man and Roll, Servbot, Beautiful Joe, Arthur, Phoenix Wright, and Monster Hunter, but this time in the Kirin armor. The new characters are the original San-San, grandfather to the San-San we knew in MVC 2, Dr. Light, the creator of Mega Man, Roll, Mega Man X, and so on, Dr. Wily, the main antagonist of the classic Mega Man era, and creator of Zero, Rathalos from Monster Hunter, Leon Kennedy from the Resident Evil series, Date Masamune in the Sumeragi outfit from the Sengoku Basara series, Leo from Red Earth. Why are there only 4 characters in this fighting game? John Talbane, a kung fu werewolf from Darkstalkers. No! And finally we have... I don't know who this is. I guess the video is scrapped. Goodbye, everybody. I'm just kidding. Meet Don the Rabbit from Don't Pool. It's part of the 3 Wonders games. It's a puzzle game in which you play as Don and Pool to push blocks to crush enemies. You can actually buy 3 Wonders through the Capcom Arcade's second stadium. It's really obscure stuff like this I just find super interesting. As I was originally typing this, I was scratching my chin because I just had no idea who this bunny was. I thought it was made up just to have a rabbit counterpart like San-San. It kind of reminded me when I first discovered where Ness was from in the early 2000s. I thought it was really cool to discover what Earthbound was before it became somewhat popular-ish in the internet culture. We're actually reaching the end. So let's get into our final 2 games.
ただいま。今日から格闘の先生に来てもらうことにした。
Oh no!
気にしないでください。
First up is Tizen Net Gimmick, Capcom and Psycho All-Stars. Released on the Dreamcast only in Japan, it features only characters from Street Fighter Alpha 3 and characters from the Psycho games. So this is Mahjong. I've never played it, nor do I have any experience with it. Outside of the episode of Chowder, where Truffles and her girlfriends play it.
He throws up whenever he looks at me.
You already know by now who these fellas are. I probably should have done this in the beginning, but whatever. So let's just briefly go over the new additions. First appearing in the original Street Fighter is Birdie, a British punk rocker, Adon, a former pupil of Sagat who aims to surpass him, and Gen, a Chinese martial arts master and former legendary assassin. The Street Fighter II series would feature DJ, a Jamaican kickboxer, T-Hawk, a Native American from Mexico, and Fei Long, an action film star from Hong Kong. Final Fight would receive Saddam, a former member and ringleader of the Mad Gear Gang. New characters from Alpha 3 are R. Mika, a Japanese professional wrestler, and finally, 2 of M. Bison's brainwashed dolls, Julie and Junie. Our final game is something special, one that no one asked for, no one anticipated to become a reality. It was only made playable for a year, but my goodness, I feel like more people need to know about this. Introducing Japan Sumo Cup, Yokozuna vs. Street Fighter. It's a rhythm browser game to promote the Japan Cup. This was available by Capcom from 2015 and ended in the following year. It features real-life sumo fighters going up against the finest of Street Fighter characters in a horse race to end all horse races. Just look at them go. Every character from Street Fighter has an accessory for their horse. such as a headband for Ryu's horse or a scrub brush to represent Guile's hair. Except for Dalsum, who rides an elephant. Are you going to tell him that's not a horse? Yeah, I didn't think so. Each character needs to be unlocked as you progress through the game. So round 1, you go up against Ryu, Dalsum, and Blanca. Round 2 is Chun-Li, Guile, and E-Honda, and round 3 is Bison. But the secret round, of course, puts you up against Akuma. The final character would be Necalli from Street Fighter V, who would be added on November 25th, 2015. Necalli is an ancient Aztec warrior seeking to devour souls of powerful warriors. This sounds cool and all, but he was wasted potential in the Street Fighter V story. Just like Chaos and Sonic Forces, just what was the point? And that was the many faces of Capcom Versus. I had a lot of fun researching this video. It gave me a better understanding of how the rosters were chosen. I still think in the end, Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3 has to be my favorite in terms of representation. Did I miss some things? Most likely. I'd love to know what you think in the comments. I do my best to read all of them. If you made it this far, consider giving the video a like and subscribe. Share it with your friends, and so on. I'll see you in the next video.